Nazi Germany was a witness to horrific atrocities during the time when Adolf Hitler was in power and the Third Reich existed. Despite the fact that the Holocaust and war crimes have been extensively researched and documented, there are still aspects of these events that are relatively unknown to the general public. Today, we shed light on the dreadful truth that the Nazi system was responsible for a wide variety of sexually exploitative and deviant activities. Let's get started. The Nazi Party wanted to exert their authority over every facet of German society, even the most private aspects of its inhabitants' lives. They imposed stringent rules on relationships, marriages, and even newborns as part of their system of sexual control and manipulation, which included the implementation of the system. Their twisted ideology and racial ideas served as the driving force behind these policies. One of the most unsettling aspects of history is the Lebensborn program, which attempted to create a master race. It was encouraged among SS officials and soldiers to have sexual relations with Aryan women in designated facilities, which severed any emotional or personal relationships that might have existed. These women were considered as mere receptacles for breeding future Nazi warriors. Children who were the product of the Lebensborn program frequently faced a childhood filled with unpredictability and prejudice. A great number of children were taken from their mothers without their will, and the mothers were subsequently scrutinized and branded as spies. The Nazis claimed that these youngsters exemplified the ideal features of the Aryan race, and as a result, they became objects of interest for the Nazis. Another horrible feature was the way in which women were used inappropriately and exploited in the detention camps. Female prisoners were often subjected to sexual assault at the hands of Nazi officers and guards, who also stripped them of their humanity and dignity. These sadistic and sexually perverted behaviors were employed as instruments of control and humiliation towards the victims. The Nazis were also responsible for implementing a cruel eugenics program that comprised the forcible sterilization of those who the Nazis believed to be unfit for society. This program was open to those of non-Aryan backgrounds, as well as those who suffered from mental or physical infirmities. Denying people their reproductive rights was only one more upsetting component of their plan. Under the Nazi system, being homosexual was a punishable offense that might lead to death. Thousands of people who identified as belonging to the LGBTQ+ community were arrested, jailed, and then deported to concentration camps. These men and women endured atrocities that are incomprehensible, and they were frequently used as subjects in medical experiments and made to perform forced labor. Within the confines of the concentration camps that the Nazis administered, they erected whorehouses that were referred to as special barracks. These brothels served as a form of recompense for privileged inmates and collaborators, providing them with a respite from the harsh conditions that they were held in. The women who were coerced into working in these brothels were subjected to severe mental and physical abuse. After Nazi Germany was defeated, many of those responsible for the atrocities committed during that time were put on trial. Those who were responsible for inflicting terrible agony on others were afforded some measure of justice as a result of the Nuremberg trials. The depths of depravity that were achieved during the time of the Nazi regime are illuminated by these cases. The most horrible sexual practices that took place in Nazi Germany provide light on the extent to which the regime attempted to control and take advantage of its population. By delving into these dreary realities, we not only pay homage to the victims, but we also make certain that atrocities of this kind are never forgotten or repeated. In order to ensure the safety of our future, we must reflect on our history. One of the numerous ambitions of those who supported Hitler was to exert control over the sexuality of the population. The goal was to get the German population to have children at whatever cost in order to halt the declining trend in the country's birth rate. In order to accomplish this goal, the government instituted a wide range of ludicrous programs and incentives, in addition to intensifying its monitoring of customs and attempts to influence people. When the Nazi Party took power in Germany, they ushered in a new cultural era that had the effect of completely revolutionizing the lives of the German people. In this new chapter of military history, are you prepared to discover everything there is to know about the censorship of sexuality under the Third Reich? Let us begin right now. In the years leading up to Hitler's rise to power in the 1920s, Germany went through a period in which traditional values fell out of favor with the general population, ushering in an era of relatively open sexual practice. As a consequence of this, the most traditional elements of society, such as the National Socialist Party, responded in kind. Following World War I, the number of kids being born in Germany continued to decrease, and supporters of Hitler initiated a propaganda campaign in which they blamed the low birth rate on the Weimar Republic, the governmental regime that was in place during those years. According to the Nazis, this occurred as a result of new tendencies that they characterized as decadent and extravagant, beginning in 1933 with the establishment of the Third Reich. The Nazis tried to promote their own view of sexuality that, while being offensive to some, was acceptable to others. Eva Braun, who was Adolf Hitler's companion for many years, was mostly unknown to the general public for a significant portion of time because Hitler himself never disclosed his romantic involvements to the public. He did this because he believed that if the female population realized he had a woman, they would stop supporting him. He also did this because he wanted to portray an image of being a celibate, pure man who was uninterested in romance and fully dedicated to Germany, which would have been his genuine love. He did this because he believed that Germany would have been his true love. In the newspapers, there were pictures of children either playing in the garden, assisting their mothers with the housework, or hugging Uncle Adolf, the name by which the dictator was known at the time. However, the Third Reich indirectly encouraged sex before or outside of marriage, which may seem contradictory given that the objective of Nazism was to create a nation of sex as opposed to a nation of marriage. The hierarchs of the Nazi groups for minors fostered relationships between young men and women when they met, with the intention of getting them to begin their sexual lives at an early age so that they might start having children as soon as possible. This was done during meetings between young men and women. As a direct consequence of this, there was a rise in the number of teen pregnancies that took place in the 1930s. At the same time, official propaganda lauded the role of single mothers, pointing to them as a foundational component of the new society. This was the same line of reasoning that Nazi organizations occasionally applied to children. It will be required to ban books, stories, works of art, and films that portray an extramarital child in a negative light or as having less worth than an illegitimate child. The adherents of the Furious even experimented with the practice of polygamy, which refers to the custom of a single man having numerous wives at the same time. The situation of Martin Bormann, Hitler's secretary and one of the leaders of the nation, was the most heartbreaking of all the cases. What do you think, my darling, of the craziness that is your other half? Curiously, the response was provided right away, and at the same time, it became very clear that his wife did not consider this to be a problem. The Nazi movement held the belief that women should be kept in a position that was subordinate to men and passive, which was entirely counter to the norms that prevailed during that period. The role of a housewife who looks after her children while also tending to the needs of her husband and the family is traditionally viewed as the pinnacle of femininity. The years that the Nazi dictatorship was in power were unimaginably painful. According to official government propaganda, romantic relationships between men were abnormal, destructive to the environment, and in direct conflict with the directive to propagate the Aryan race. The Gestapo was the organization responsible for carrying out the persecution, and in 1934 it drew up the so-called pink lists, which contained the names of homosexuals in each town. Armed with this information, the Nazis raided the gay communities, clubs, and bars, arrested their members, and detained them without warrants. While they were in custody, they were blackmailed or tortured into betraying other homosexuals, and so the procedure was repeated. Beginning in 1938, the Gestapo announced that this nightmare would continue until 1945, when World War II finally came to an end. We have reached the end of the film, and we want to ask you what was the most eye-opening thing about sexuality and Nazism. Thanks for watching. Bye.